Order. Questions to the Prime Minister. Richard Drax.
Number 2, sir.
Mr.
Prime
Speaker,
Minister.
this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Richard Drax.
Mr. Speaker, in 2015, a group called the Socialist Campaign for Labour Victory incredulously drew up a plan to disband MI5, disarm the police and scrap our nuclear deterrent. Would my right honourable friend allow anyone who endorsed such a plan to write her manifesto or indeed serve in her cabinet?
Minister.
I can tell my honourable friend that my answer to that is a resounding no, I would not. And can I commend my honourable friend who has a proud record of defending our country, but he's raised an important point because, of course, the Leader of the Opposition has chosen just such a person. The plan to disband MI5, to disarm our police and to scrap our nuclear deterrent was endorsed by the Right Honourable Gentleman's Policy Chief and even by his Shadow Chancellor. And again at the weekend we saw the Right Honourable Gentleman refusing to say he would strike against terrorism, refusing to commit to our nuclear deterrent and refusing to control our borders. Keeping a country safe is the first duty of a Prime Minister. The Right Honourable Gentleman is simply not up to the job.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the last Prime Minister's question time of this Parliament. And I think it would be appropriate, Mr. Speaker, if we all paid tribute to those colleagues who have decided to leave the House at the end of this Parliament. Thank them for their service. Thank them for their service to democracy in this country, and to thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the way you presided over this House and the way in which you've sought to reach out to the wider communities in this country. Mr. Speaker, when I became Leader of the Opposition 18 months ago, if they'll wait a moment, I'll explain what I'm about to say. I said I wanted people's voices to be heard in Parliament. So, Mr. Speaker, instead of just speaking to hand-picked audiences who can't ask questions, I hope the Prime Minister won't mind if she answers some questions today from the public.
Give it a try. Give it a try. You never know.
I start, Mr. Speaker, with Christopher, who wrote to me this week, and he says, in the last 5 years, my husband has had only a 1% increase in his wages. The cost of living has risen each year. We now have at least 15% less buying power than them. So where is Christopher and his husband's share in the stronger economy?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I first of all join the Right Honourable Gentleman in commending those colleagues who are leaving the House for the service that they have shown to their constituents and to Parliament over the years. Can I also say a huge thank you to the staff of the House of Commons and of Parliament who support us in the work that we do here in this chamber and elsewhere. I will come on to the point about, I note, by the way, that the Right Honourable Gentleman didn't take the opportunity to stand up and show how he would actually stand up for the defence of our country. Once again, he missed that opportunity. I note what the Right Honourable Gentleman is saying about wages increasing. I see today that he is talking about paying for extra wage increases in the National Health Service. I think we should first of all recognise, actually, that for people working in the National Health Service, around half of those staff, because of progression and basic pay increases, will actually see on average a pay increase of 4% in their total. What we know, and what I can say to Christopher is that he will have a choice at the next election. A choice between the strong and stable leadership of the Conservatives, which will secure our economy for the future, and a Labour Party which would crash our economy, which would mean less money for public services, and the ordinary working families would pay the price.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Mr. Speaker, isn't the truth that many people are being held back by this government that has slashed taxes for the rich and held back or cut the pay of dedicated public servants? Mr. Speaker, Andy, a parent, is concerned about how his children are being held back. He asks why, despite the fact they've worked consistently since leaving school, all three of my children, who are now in their mid-20s, cannot afford to move out of the family home. Isn't this a crisis that many people are facing all over the country? Don't we need a housing strategy that deals with it?
Well, first of all, let's look and see what happened under a Labour government for housing. Under the last Labour government, house building starts fell by 45%. Under the last Labour government, homes purchased in England fell by 40%, and the number of social rented homes under a Labour government fell by 420,000. Under the Conservatives, we've seen more than twice as much council housing being built than under the last Labour government. That's a record of the Conservative government delivering on housing, delivering for ordinary working families.
Mr. Speaker, the last Labour government delivered a decent home standard for every council home in the whole of the country, and it's something we are very proud of. Very proud of indeed of that achievement. And her government, house building has fallen to the lowest level since the 1920s. More people homeless, more people on waiting lists, more people overcrowded, more people unable to pay the rent. That is the record of the Tory government. And Mr. Speaker, our children are being held back by Conservative cuts. Laura, a young primary school teacher, wrote to me this week saying, "I'm seeing a decrease each year in available cash to provide a quality education to the children in my class, and an increase in reliance upon our Parent Teachers Association." So is the Prime Minister still denying the fact that funding for each pupil is still being cut?
Minister!
Well, what I would say to Laura is that we said we will protect school budgets, and we have. We have seen record levels of funding going into schools in this country. But at the election on the 8th of June, people are going to have a very clear choice. They will have a choice between a Conservative government that has delivered 1.8 million more good and outstanding school places for children across this country, a Conservative government that believes in parents having choice in a range of schools, providing the education that is right for every child and a good school place for every child, and a Labour Party, the right honourable gentleman, who believes in a one-size-fits-all, take everybody down to the lowest common denominator, take it or leave it. We believe in encouraging aspiration and helping people to get on in their lives.
Mr. Speaker, Labour isn't slashing school budgets. Labour isn't putting money into pet projects. We want every child to have a decent chance in a decent school. We don't want an education system that relies on begging letters from the schools in order to maintain employment and books in the classroom. Many people feel, Mr. Speaker, the system is rigged against them. Maureen wrote to me this week. If I was you, I'd listen to what Maureen has to say. I really would. I really would, because she writes, and she writes with a heavy heart. We have been treated disgustingly. Most of us women born in the 1950s will not be receiving our pension until we are 66, with no notification of this drastic change. We've worked for 45 years and have accrued more than enough to be paid our pension. People want what is rightfully theirs. Maureen asks, what can be done to help the WASPy women?
Prime Minister.
To the issue that Maureen has raised is that the government has taken steps to help these women. We have put there's extra funding means made available, and we've ensured that there is a limit to the period of time that is affected in relation to these changes. But if the right honourable gentleman wants to talk about pensions and pensioners looking to the future, then once again there will be a very clear choice at this election. A clear choice between a Labour Party who in government saw the increase in basic state pension of 75 pence in 1 year, and a Conservative government whose changes to pensions mean basic state pensioners are £1,250 better off. But you only get that with a strong economy. And what do we know about Labour? Only yesterday we saw that we had finally emerged from Labour's economic crash. What we now see is a Labour Party that would do it again. Crash the economy, more debt, more waste, higher taxes, fewer jobs. That does nothing for ordinary working families or for pensioners.
Mr. Speaker, millions of WASPy women will have heard that answer, as have the other questions that I've put not been answered today. I simply say this: Labour will guarantee the triple lock. Labour will treat pensioners with respect, and we won't move the goalposts to people looking forward to retirement. Sybil, Mr. Speaker, who witnessed the Labour founding of the National Health Service, which made healthcare available for the many, not just a few, wrote to me this week, and she says this: I'm 88 and I've had a wonderful service from the National Health Service, but nowadays I'm scared at the thought of going into hospital. With more people waiting more than 4 hours in the A&E, more people waiting on trolleys in corridors, more delayed discharges, Mr. Speaker, thanks to the Tory cuts. Isn't Sybil right to be frightened about the future of NHS so long as this government remains in office?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I just say to the right honourable gentleman on the National Health Service, our National Health Service is now treating more patients than it ever has before. We're seeing more people having operations, we're seeing more doctors, more nurses, more midwives, more GPs, and record levels of funding into our National Health Service. But it's only possible with a strong economy, and that's only possible with a strong and stable government. And of course, over the coming weeks, we are all going to be out there campaigning across the country, as I will be, taking our record in the National Health Service. I did note this week that the Shadow Home Secretary has been campaigning in her own personal way. She has directed her supporters, her followers, to a website, I Like Corbyn But. It says, how will he pay for all this? But I've heard he wants to increase taxes. But I've heard he's a terrorist sympathiser. But his attitudes about defence worry me. They are right to be worried, unable to defend our country, determined to raise tax on ordinary workers, no plan to manage our economy. Even his own supporters know he's not fit to run this country.
Mr. Speaker, my question was about the National Health Service and Sybil's concerns. The NHS hasn't got... It's all right. The NHS has not got the money it needs. The Prime Minister knows that. She knows waiting times and waiting lists are up. She knows there's a crisis in almost every A&E department. Maybe she could go to a hospital and allow the staff to ask her a few questions. Mr. Speaker, strong leadership is about standing up for the many, not the few. But when it comes to the Prime Minister and the Conservatives, they only look after the richest, not the rest. They are strong against the weak and weak against the strong. Far from building a strong economy, schools and our NHS are being cut. People can't afford homes, millions can't make ends meet. That doesn't add up to a stronger economy for anyone. Mr. Speaker, the election on the 8th of June is a choice between between a Conservative government for the few and a Labour government that will stand up for all of our people.
Prime Minister!
If the right honourable gentleman wants to talk about the NHS, perhaps he should talk about Labour's custodianship of the NHS in Wales. There is somewhere where the NHS has been cut. It's in Wales under the Labour Party. But the right honourable gentleman is right. In something over 6 weeks, we will be back at these dispatch boxes again. And the only question is, where will we be standing? Who will be Prime Minister of this great country? And he says the choice is clear. And the choice is clear. Every vote for him is a vote for a chaotic Brexit. Every vote for me is a vote to strengthen our hand in negotiating the best deal for Britain. Every vote for him is a vote to weaken our economy. Every vote for me is a vote for a strong economy with the benefits felt by everyone across the country. And every vote for him is a vote for a coalition of chaos. A weak leader propped up by the Liberal Democrats and the Scottish Nationalists. Every vote for me is a vote for strong and stable leadership in the national interest, building a stronger and more secure future for this country.
The exchanges between the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition have been unprecedentedly comprehensive. For Angus Robertson.
Will the Prime Minister give a clear and unambiguous commitment to maintaining the triple lock on the state pension?
Prime Minister.
I've been very clear that under this Conservative government, we have seen pensioners benefit as a result of what we've done to the basic state pension. To the tune of £1,250 a year. And I am clear that under a Conservative government, pension and incomes would continue to increase.
Mr. Speaker, I asked the Prime Minister a pretty simple question. It's a yes or a no. And the Prime Minister failed to answer. So pensioners right across this land are right to conclude that this Tory Prime Minister plans to ditch the triple lock on the state pension. Mr. Speaker, too many women already face pensions inequality, and the Tories now won't even guarantee the pensions triple lock. And the only reason that they will not guarantee it is because they want to cut pensions. It's not the message to pensioners. You cannot trust this Prime Minister. You cannot trust the Tories on your pension.
I say to everybody, as I've just said, if you want to know the party in government that has improved the lot of pensioners across this country, it is the Conservative Party. And under a Conservative government, those pensioner incomes would continue to increase. And he talks about inequality for women. It's the change in the structure of the state pension introduced by this government that is going to improve the lot of women, female pensioners in the future, that is going to be much better for them. But one thing that pensioners in Scotland will know, as other voters in Scotland will know, is that if they believe in the Union, there's only one way to vote, and that's to vote Conservative.
Mr. Peter Lilley.
Does my right honourable friend realise I'm standing down after 34 years because of her? Because I have confidence that the country will be safe after the election under her strong and stable leadership. Does she realise that does she agree that seizing the opportunities from regaining control over our laws, our money, our borders and our trade will be more important than the terms of any exit deal? And does she recognise that to get a reasonable deal, we must accept that no deal is indeed better than a bad deal? And to deny this signals that no price is too high, no concession too grovelling to accept. A recipe for the worst possible deal. So I wish my right honourable friend, all honourable members and this House I love, Godspeed.
Prime Minister!
Well, can I thank my right honourable friend for the tremendous contribution that he has made through his years as a member of this House, not only for his constituents, but also for the time that he spent in government as a valued minister in a Conservative government. He has rightly highlighted the importance of the decision that was taken last year by the people of the United Kingdom. I commend him. He played a role in that referendum campaign. It is right that we get on with that job of delivering Brexit, of making a success of it. That does mean a strong hand in negotiations, and the only way to ensure that that is the case, the only way to ensure that for the people of Hitchin and Harpenden and the whole of the UK is to ensure a Conservative government is elected on the 8th of June.
Sir Eric Pickle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has shown considerable leadership in adopting the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. Does she believe it's a duty of all party leaders within this House not just to play lip service to it, but to do something about it? And does she share my... Sorry about that. And does she share my disgust that a former member of this House, criticised by the Home Affairs Select Committee for his anti-Semitic utterances, is now the official candidate in Bradford East for the Liberal Democrats?
Can I first of all pay tribute to my right honourable friend, my chum in this House, for all the service that he has given. And not just for his service in this House, but he had a considerable record in local government before he came into this House. And he has also, in his time, and the work that he has done on anti-Semitism, performed a very important role. He has had a relentless drive to stamp out anti-Semitism and indeed intolerance in all its forms in our communities. And he should be proud of the record that he has and the work that I know he will be continuing to do as a champion for this on this issue. He's right to highlight Bradford, of course. My right honourable friend has a particular knowledge of that city, and people will be, I think, rightly disappointed to see the Liberal Democrats re-adopt a candidate with a questionable record on anti-Semitism. It is important that all parties maintain the strongest possible censure on all forms of intolerance and send that message to our communities.
Tim Farron.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the 9 months that the Prime Minister has held her office, she has closed the door on desperate child refugees. She has ignored She has ignored the plight of those suffering under the crisis in health and social care, and she is responsible for the shameful rape clause. 20 years ago, she berated the Conservative Party for being the nasty party, but her party has never been nastier. But the legacy of this Parliament, the legacy...
Order! Whatever the strength of feeling, the right honourable gentleman must be heard. Mr. Tim Farron.
And the legacy of this Parliament, though, the legacy of this Parliament is the utter abject failure of Her Majesty's official opposition to effectively hold her government to account for any of it. Is it not time that Britain had a strong, decent, new opposition?
Prime Minister!
Well, first of all, let me just pick up the point he made on child refugees. This government has a proud record on supporting refugees from Syria. We have been the second biggest bilateral donor to the region in order to support millions of refugees, to educate children, as I saw when I visited Jordan recently. And of course, we've also supported some of the most vulnerable refugees, including children, in bringing them here to make a new life in the United Kingdom. He talks about a decent opposition. I find it difficult to hear those words coming from his mouth when we've just heard that his party has selected a candidate with questionable views on anti-Semitism.